Hello again, everyone. This is Zombie Kids Rule, and it's time for another RPG Maker MZ tutorial. So in this tutorial, I want to show a couple of different things, and the first one being this down here. If you're looking, there's a event that is invisible to the player when it first starts, and the functionality I want to show is that I was experimenting with and playing around with is placing this event somewhere else on the map. And the way I set it up was to do it randomly, so it would appear like up here, down here, or down here, depending on the randomness of it. But the functionality is that you could have a series of criteria or conditions that that you are looking at that will determine where this event is placed, or even perhaps when it's placed. So the question that this started with is, could I take an event that's not on the map, it's not fixed on the map, and can I place it somewhere for whatever reason I want? And can I place it in different places? Have it in different spots? And the answer is yes, absolutely. And so that's what part of this is going to be. And then building on that, or kind of similar to it, is where you have a fixed location. So you have an event at a fixed location because you know that's where you want it to be, but you want to swap it with one or multiple events. So you could set up an event where you just had an event here on the map, an event here, and you just swap them. What I'm doing is this event is going to trigger randomly one of these events swapping. Okay, and again, functionality wise, there could be a lot of different ways to implement this, but the idea is you have a fixed location and you don't want every single player or every single playthrough or perhaps every single time of day or every condition to have the same event be available at that specific location. Maybe this event is an entrance to something. Maybe this is a treasure chest. Maybe this is a monster. Maybe this is an NPC. And essentially, what you're going to do is you're going to say, hey, any of these things, and you could have as many of these as you want. You could have 20 of them. Any of these things can appear here based on how I want to determine when that's going to happen. And there's some things you have to be careful of. So the concept here is, can I randomly place an event somewhere on the map, or can I take a fixed location and can I swap some event of my choosing? And of course, the answer is yes, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So first, let me get my caveats out of the way. I will just say this is the second time I've been trying to make this video now. The first time, because I had built this quite a while ago, I made the video, and then as I was wrapping up, I said, here, let me show you what happens when you remove this one piece. And then it didn't do what I expected it to do. In fact, it did some really unexpected things. So I had to get rid of that video and I had to go back and figure out what was happening, which was good because I actually learned more, and I learned things that if I had implemented them, I would have gotten unexpected results. So this was actually a beneficial thing. And then I just tried to make this video again, and then I realized as I was testing it, showing what was in the game, it suddenly did something I didn't expect. Now, it's good. I mean, it was built the way it was supposed to be. I just forgot what I did. So I was like, why is it doing that? Why is it doing that? I had to stop the video, take a look, and say, oh, yes, okay, now I remember why. But anyway, but that's neither here nor there. Now, my caveats. If you've watched any of my previous videos, you've heard this. I apologize, but for new people, I feel like I need to say this. I am a new user of RPG Maker of any version. I just bought MZ about a year ago, like last Christmas, and I've only got a little more than 200 hours using it. I am by no means an expert, and I've been watching a lot of tutorials, and I've been experimenting a lot and building and just trying to research things. And when I need to, I ask questions on the RPGmakerweb.com forum. Great bunch of people over there. If you haven't been over there and you haven't joined, I highly recommend you do so. But I'm not an expert. And so what these videos are is just me showing what I've been able to build, what I've been able to figure out. And usually it's because I haven't seen a video out there that shows it, because I usually search for them and I usually try to find a tutorial. I try to find my answers. And so these are usually things that I couldn't find my answer directly. I had to figure it out. And now I'm like, hey, I built it. I might as well share it. And maybe that will help other people on their journey of learning RPG Maker. And most of these should work with MV as well. So I'm more focused on MZ, but it should work for MV at the very least as well. I also say that, I'm not saying this is the best way to do something or the most efficient way to do something. All I'm doing is say this is a way that works. There are probably better ways to do it, and I'm not using really any plugins for the majority of my videos. So this is just a way to do things through eventing, through scripts, things like that. And I am not saying this is the best way to do it. And in fact, I fully expect that I will find better ways to do some of this stuff as I learn more, and then I will improve upon it. And then last, I usually say is I don't make fancy videos, right? I don't spend a lot of time making fancy maps and things like that, fancy, custom made sprites and things like that, because that's not what my focus is. Right now, I'm trying to learn the functionality. And then I'm going to learn plugins, and then I'm going to learn all this other stuff. And then I'll be building, okay, now we got to focus on the maps and the graphics and the appearances and all this other stuff. Okay, so those are my caveats. Now, let me show you first, before I show you this, the random placement and then the swapping, let me show you one of the problems that results if you don't do this correctly. Okay, so I'm going to show this little test here. And so first, this is a very quick little test. Here's this little witch person on the screen, and when I click on them, they're going to swap places with this werewolf looking person. Okay, so I'm going to click on them, and the event swapped. Very, very simple event swap. Okay, now I'm going to click on the werewolf, and the werewolf says, "Come here, Red." That's page 1 of the event. Now it advanced to page 2. So I click on it again. Hey, your grandma was delicious. Now the werewolf is on page 2. But they've swapped. Now, when I first started playing around with this, I thought that that's where they would stay. But that's not true. When I leave the map and I come back, the events returned to where they started. So now if I click on this one, they swap again, and that event remembers that it was on page 2. It was on the second page. It remembers that, but they swap back. So when you leave and you come back working with this type of placement of events or swapping of events, it's going to go back to the way they were unless you force it to stay where you want it to stay. All right. Or I should say, what I did was I made it rapidly redo what it did the first time. So for the players, for all the player knows, it never changed, right? The player doesn't realize that it swapped back. They would never notice that. Okay, so that's highlighting what part of the problem is. Now, let me show you, and now I'm going to go up here because this is where I'm going to start. And I'll set my player. Okay, here we go. So now what's going to happen is when I go to this next map, there's going to be a character, an NPC, whatever you want to call it, is going to appear in the very middle. That's the stationary one. And then the other one is going to randomly appear in one of the 4 quadrants. Okay, so this one randomly appeared down here. This one is stationary here. It is this sprite, white dress with a white hat. Now, if I leave the map, they're going to stay the same. So this person stayed down here. This person stayed in the middle. If I leave the map, come back, they're going to stay in the exact same spot. Now, if I go over here, I'm going to change this to night, and it's also going to tell me my playtime. Okay, I got to go quick now. So night, they disappear. Because at nighttime, they're not, that middle one is gone. This person stays. Now, the other thing I set up, now I'm going to turn it back to day, and my playtime is 58 seconds. Now, when I go back, there's going to be a different sprite in the middle, because the way I set it up was that between when I'm checking playtime, and between 60 seconds and 120 seconds, this will change every time you leave the map. And I also set it up where this guy changed. So I'm going to leave the map again. I'm going to come back, and this person's down here, and this middle character is different. I'm going to do it again, and they're the same, but now it's different again. Okay, partly because oh, there we go. So for basically 1 minute, this middle character is going to swap out until 2 minutes is up. Once 2 minutes is up, I'm gonna go over here and check. So it's still 1 minute, and if I go over here, they'll be gone. Okay, check here. So 2 minutes is okay. Now it's set where it's no longer going to swap within that 1 minute time frame. So this character in the middle is going to stay there. They're not going to change. Okay, they're just going to stay there forever. Okay, it's doing what I want it to do. Now I can reset this. Okay, so the events on the page are reset, which means when I move, come down here, a different character appeared. This guy appeared in a different quadrant, but it's going to stay there now because the timer that I set is already gone. My playtime hasn't been reset. So that's going to stay like it is. And if I reset my event, it'll do it again. It'll just change. Okay? And you notice this guy's appearing over here. I'm going to go up here and do it one more time. See if he changes quadrants, which he should. Yeah, he was down here now. And then, of course, there's a different person in the middle. All right, so that's what's functioning in the game. Okay? All right, so how did this work? All right, so first, let's go to the swap event. Now, there's a bunch of different things happening at once. So let me just show you first the swap, the random placement of event. This one is really easy. They're really, these extra pages, they're not, they were only for testing. You really don't need these extra pages. So all this event is doing, it's invisible, first of all. There's no image the first time, right? There's no image. And the player can't interact with it. It's off the map, but it's set to run parallel. So as soon as this map activates, this event is going to run in parallel with anything else that's going to be set to run. So the first thing it does is it says if random event placement is less than 1. Okay, it's checking to see if random event placement is less than 1. That means the value is 0 or below. It's going to take a conditional variable, 95, random event placement is the name, and it's going to generate a random number 1 to 4. Okay, that's the first thing that's going to do. And then there's a series of conditional statements, right? This whole thing is conditional statements or conditional branches. If the random event placement is 1, then it's taking these two variables, 96 and 97, random event placement X and random event placement Y, and it's setting coordinates on the map. So the X of 3 and the Y of 3. So X, right, is going, let's see if I remember right, X is going across and Y is going up and down, right? So X is horizontal, Y is vertical. So you basically count across 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, wherever. And I'm sorry, anyway, it's using the X and Y of the map to set this event placement. Then it's a transfer. So if I go here, right, it's my variable, and I'm setting to a constant. Okay, I'm just setting two constants. Then I'm using the set event location. I'm choosing this event. That's the event that's off the map. And instead of doing a direct designation where I choose exactly where I want it to go, I'm using variables. So this allows me to use change my variable values, and it'll change the location of the event. And then I'm retaining the direction that the sprite is facing. Okay. So again, if I just double click and I set on event commands, page 2, set event location. You can choose either the event you're on, or you can choose any of the events, right? And you can either direct designate it on the map, or you can set it with variables, or you can swap it with another event, which is what I do with that middle event. So if the random generated number is 1, then the variable 96 is 3, variable 97 is 3, and what I'm doing is I am using those variables for the x and y on the map. Okay. And then all I did was and then I'm turning on self switch A. Okay, which is going to advance the page. I'll show you what it's doing. I was just testing. These pages really aren't necessary, not really. I'm just doing that. I could have had just one page, but I wanted to test something. So I then take this and I copied and pasted it 3 times. And so for the second time, if the random event placement variable conditional branch is a 2, then I put variable 96 to a 3, so it's the same x. 97 to a 9, so that places it down lower on the map. And then, again, this is copied and pasted, and the variables don't change, right? These variables don't have to change. It's the values that I changed. So I changed this 1 to a 2. I left the 3 the same. I changed this 3 to a 9. This stayed exactly the same. Didn't touch this one. And then I turned on self switch B to a different page. This one, again, copy and pasted. I just made a small change. I changed this to a 3. I changed the x variable to a 13. Changed the y variable back to a 3. This didn't change at all because it's using these 2 variables for the transfer or the swap, I should say, or the placement. I should say the placement. And then control self switch C is being turned on. And then this one, same thing. I changed this to a 4, kept the x location as a 13, changed the y to a 9. This stayed the same because I'm using the values of the variables for the setting the location, and then self switch D. That's all this event is doing. And so it's checking first. And why is it checking first? It's checking first to say, oh, there isn't a value here yet. I haven't done this yet the first time. So the value of this when you first start the game will be 0. And so if it's 0, so it's less than 1, it's 0, that means I have to figure out where I'm going to place the event. And then once I figure that out, I want to keep that. And that's why it remembers it. Because once you set this to a number, 1, 2, 3, or 4, when you load this map again, this is not going to be 0. It's going to be a 1, 2, 3, or 4, which means it's not going to randomly redetermine it. It's just going to immediately do whichever one it is. So if the first time this runs in parallel on the map and it comes out to be a 3, and it sets the event location to this, then the next time when you leave and come back to this map, it's going to skip this because it's not less than 1. And it's going to go, oh, it's not a 1, it's not a 2, it's a 3. So it puts it right back where it's supposed to be. So it remembers it, okay? And then these pages are just self switch A is the same image, and I just changed I changed what the monster says because I wanted to check to make sure that the pages were changing the way I wanted them to do and everything else. So he says grr here, self switch B is on, blah, self switch C is on, rar, and self switch D is on is mwahaha, right? So these pages really aren't that important. This is where the functionalities happen. Okay, so that's the first part. Now, let me show you this one, and then I'll show you how things get partially reset. Okay, so in this event, what this is doing is it's waiting 5 frames. The reason it's waiting 5 frames is because this is running in parallel, but this event down here is also running in parallel. And I want this event to run first. It's important that this event runs first. So I need to make that other event in the middle wait just 5/60ths of a second to allow this to run, and then it's okay for this to run. All right, so it waits 5/60ths of a second. Then it's running in parallel. There's nothing here. It checks first, is night on? If night is on, and that's a switch. If the switch night is on, and then there's an else branch, then it's going to exit event processing. Okay, it's going to exit event processing, and that means it's not going to do anything. It's going to sit there and it's going to stay there. Okay, it's going to sit empty, right? It's not going to swap with anything. Else, then it's going to check these conditional branches. If event swap test is 0, which is what it will be the first time this runs on the map, if it's 0, because it's a variable, jump to label random, meaning it's going to skip this stuff here, and it's going to go down here to this label random. Well, why is it doing that? Well, the first time this event runs, if this is 0, it's going to jump to this random label down here. It's going to determine which event to swap with over on the side. When we come back, right, the event swap test won't be 0 anymore. And so this here is where it's remembering what event we swapped it with. So down here later on, we're going to set the event swap test to a random variable of 1 to 4. Up here, it's gonna basically say, oh, you came back on the map. Night is not on, so I need to do something. This is not 0, right? So I'm going to check and see, originally when you first did this, was it a 1, a 2, a 3, or a 4? And that tells me which one of these events I'm going to activate again, which I'm going to swap with. So this is jump to label NPC1, jump to label NPC2, jump to label NPC3, jump to label NPC4. Okay, based on the variable event swap test, whether it's a 1, a 2, or 3, or 4. That's for when we return to the map, and it runs again. So before that, the first time it runs, it'll come down here and say, I'm going to take this variable D4 roll, I'm going to make a random number 1 to 4, and then I'm going to check conditional branch. If it's a 1, if it's a 2, if it's a 3, it's a 4. If the random variable is a 1, then I'm going to basically take the event swap test and add that number to it. Okay? And then I'm going to jump to NPC to the label NPC1, because the role of a 1 is NPC1. If it's a 2, it's going to add that role 2 to the event swap test, and it's going to jump to NPC label 2. If it's a 3, it's going to add the 3, the die 4 role, to the event swap test, and it's going to jump to NPC 3. And if it's a 4, it's going to add it to the event swap test, and it's going to jump to NPC label 4. Okay, so all of this is basically helping to make the event go back to what it was the first time we triggered this to run parallel. Now, label NPC1. This is where the swapping happens. So label NPC1. Set event location, this event, that's the event in the middle of the screen, exchange with NPC1. So in the set event command, page 2 of the event commands, set event location, you choose this event, and then you exchange with another event, and you get to pick which events on this map you want to switch it with. And I switched it with NPC1. Okay? And then this is turning on, using a script, it's turning on a self switch. And it's actually turning on the self switch of the event over here. So I'm not in this event. I'm in this middle event, right? In the crossroads. I'm in that middle event. This script is turning on a self switch over here, and I'll show you why. Basically, the script that you use to turn on a self switch, right, to any event is $game capital self capital switches dot set capital value. So basically, turn on the self switch for, and then you have a parentheses and a bracket. The 9 is the map. So I'm on map 9 right down here. See, map 9, swap event test map. The 4 is the event that you want to switch it with. So NPC1 is event 4. And then the single quote, capital A, single quote, that's the self switch that you want to either turn on or off. A, B, C, or D, right? Events have self switches right here, self switches. And so turn on self switch, A, B, C, or D. Okay, so you can turn on either turn on or off those. So then there's a bracket, comma, true means you're turning the switch on. If it's false, you're turning it off. And then you have your closing parentheses. So once again, right, so in a script, so this is a script, $game capital self capital switches dot set capital value, parentheses, bracket, 9 is the map location, comma, 4 is the event location, comma, single quote, capital A, single quote, that's the self switch you want to turn on or off, bracket, comma, make sure you have your space, false or true, so true to turn it on, false to turn it off, and then your parentheses, your closing parentheses. And if I double click, the script is on page 3 of event commands. There's your script. Okay? All right. So it's swapping the event, it's turning on a self switch in that event, and then it's turning control self switch A to on, which basically means it's going to advance this to page 2. Okay? Then it's going to exit the event processing. It's going to jump out of this. Okay? The rest of these are pretty much the same, except you're just swapping a couple things. So label NPC2, which is the event over here too. Set event location, this event, exchange with NPC2. And then you're going to do that same self switch script, except it's going to be map 9, event 6, and then switch A is being set to true. Now, one of the things, if you haven't noticed this, okay, I'm going to exit this for a minute. I don't think I changed anything, but it doesn't matter. I'll just go ahead. If you didn't notice, when when you make and delete events, so I made NPC 1, and then just because of the way I did things, event 5 ended up being NPC 3. Event 6 ended up being NPC 2. Event 7 ended up being NPC 4. I didn't bother to rechange them. Okay, but this is why you can kind of get your stuff messed up if you're not careful. So I wanted these to be in order, and they ended up not being order. I just didn't want to fix it. So again, so NPC 2, you select that to swap. You do the self switch, turning it on through a script, and then control self switch A. Exit the event, right? If you're jumping to label NPC 3, this is the same except for you're swapping it to change with NPC 3. You do the self switch, and it's map 9, event 5, and then the self switch A is being turned on, and then control self switch A. Exit the event processing. If you're jumping to label NPC 4, then again, this is exactly the same except you exchange it with NPC 4 event. The script is the same except you're changing it to event 7. And then the control self switch A is on, and then you exit the event. When you can turn control self switch on, this is a parallel event. It runs all by itself. When you turn self switch A on, that makes this page the highest page where the conditions are met. And so this page becomes active. And you notice that there's no image, so the image goes away, and basically you can't interact with it. So when that middle square swaps and it jumps over here, you basically, there's nothing there to see. It's gone. Okay? So this page is on, this is activated. So again, once again, this can be a little confusing, but it's waiting 5 frames because this event needs to have a fraction of a second to run. It's checking to see if night is on, because if night is on, it's going to exit, right? Because there's not going to be a sprite in the middle of the screen if night is on. It's going to check to see if event swap test is 0. If it is 0, meaning that it's never been done before, then it's going to jump to label random, because it's going to randomly determine which event it's going to swap to. If it's not 0, because we've used this before, we've been on this map before, then it's going to say, okay, well, what was the value of the event swap test? Was it 1, 2, 3, or 4? And if it's 1, I'm going to jump to label NPC 1. If it's 2, NPC 2. If it's 3, NPC 3. If it's 4, NPC 4. Here's label random. Here's the control, the random 1 to 4. And then this is where it's setting it up that first time, right? If the random roll is a 1, then we're adding 1 to the event swap test variable, and we're jumping to label NPC 1. Okay, and then it's repeated for this one, and this one. Then this is what we just done going over. Label NPC 1, you're telling it which event to swap with, you're turning on the self switch of one of those events, right? Map, event, self switch, remember single quote, true is on, false is off, and then setting the self switch for this event to change the page, and then exit. And then the rest of these, right? Whoops. The rest of these are the same. NPC 2, NPC 3, NPC 4, they're all the same. Okay. And I mentioned this is parallel. All right, now let's look over here. These events are really simple. Okay, there's a lot of pages, but again, it's only because I wanted to advance the dialogue of the page. So first page, while they're sitting over here, there's no image. You can't interact with it, right? It's not parallel. It's not auto run. It's just sitting there. It's waiting for that middle swap event to change places with it. Remember, in that other event, we're turning on the self switch of this event, right? Or this event, or this event, or this event. When we turn that self switch on, then page 2, this is the page, the highest page where the condition is met, self switch A is on. So that activates the image. That's what makes the sprite appear. And it's same as character, player, touch, so we can interact with it. Now, if we had clicked on it, it would just say hello, and then it's going to add 1 to a tracker variable, NPC1 tracker. I only did this because I wanted to test and show that you could advance the dialogue. You could advance the progress in this event, and it would remember where it was, even though it's going back here and you're swapping it back and forth. So by raising this to 1, when we look at page 3, it has 2 conditions. Self switch A is on, which got turned on through that middle event, the script. And then the variable NPC tracker 1 is greater or equal to 1, which it is because we just added 1 to it. When we do that, it makes this page all the conditions met. So this page is active. So it changes what it says to you. And then it adds 1 to the tracker. So surprise, surprise, that makes this page active. Self switch A is still on. The variable NPC tracker is now 2 or greater. So it's going to show this page. Stop bothering me, right? And that's just showing that you can advance an event. And it will remember where it was. It won't reset unless you make it reset. Okay? Now, all these events are almost exactly the same. So all I did was I made this first event, and then I copied and pasted it 3 times. And when I go to this one, this is the same. There's no image. You can't interact with it. Page 2, there's a different sprite. There's a different image. It's still self switch A because that's what's getting turned on to advance the page. Still player touch, same as character, hello. NPC2 tracker, right? So I'm using a different variable. And then it behaves the same way. Moves to this page, adds it again, moves to this page, it stays there, right? Different sprite. This one is exactly the same. Starts off exactly the same. You don't have to change anything. Different sprite. And then this is all the same. NPC3 tracker. Okay, all this other stuff is the same. Advancing it, right? The variable and the self switch has to be on, and that's it. And then the last one is, again, same first page. Second page has a different sprite to it. All this stuff stays the same. All this I kept the same, just for testing purposes, right? Just for testing purposes, I kept this stuff the same. And I used different variables to track the progress. NPC4 tracker, right? Boom, boom. All that stuff's the same. Okay, so now this event here is running, and it's figuring out which one of these to swap with. And it's remembering it, right? It's remembering it based on different things I've done. What is this event doing? All right, now this is the parallel event that has to run first. And I added this, right? This was, again, I was just messing around with this. This is empty, right? You can't see it, but it's running in parallel. First thing it's doing, it's checking to see the playtest time, right? So variable 103, playtest time, is equal to playtime. That's an option you can actually do. This variable is equal to game data, or is set to game data, other data, and one of the choices you have is playtime. Okay? So I was just messing around with playtime. And then I said, okay, wait, let's do a conditional branch. If playtime test, this variable, is greater than 60, that means it's greater than 60 seconds. And if playtime test is less than or equal to 120. So if this variable is basically between 61 and 120, then it's going to set event swap test back to 0. That's what makes that middle event redetermine which event to swap with. And it changes the random event placement to 0. That was this one over here, random event placement, right? So, and this one was event swap, right? So what this is doing is it's saying, hey, if you've been playing for 61 seconds to 120 seconds, then if you leave and come back on this map, that's going to change which event it swaps with, but only during that time frame. Because after that, it's not going to reset those, right? If it's more than 120 seconds, it's not going to reset that, which means it's going to remember what it was before. So this was something I just messed around with. I wanted to see how it works. So if this, empty else branches, that means if these are not true, it's going to drop down here. What is this doing? Okay, all this is doing is in one script field. This is turning all of these self switches in these events to off. It's turning them off. So $ game, capital self, capital switches, dot set capital value, right? All of these are map 9. Then it's event 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 9, 9, 9, 9, right? So these are the events. And then it's self switch A, B, C, D, because that's in event 9, self switch A, 9, self switch B, 9, self switch C, 9, self switch D. I don't know which one of these is going to actually be on. So I'm just turning them all to false, right? Because it's random, I don't know which one of these switches is going to be on, so I'm just turning them all off. And then I'm erasing this event. And it only is erased until I leave the map. When I leave the map and come back, this event reappears and it runs in parallel again. But this, coupled with what's happening in the other event, is what allows these things to swap again, right? So by turning these switches off, right, That means if this event was on, say, this page, right? When I leave and come back, this sprite would show up over here and the player would be able to see it. Well, I don't want that to happen. So by this event down here running first, it's going to turn off this self switch, which means it goes back to this page where there's no sprite. And that's all it's doing, right? Well, it's not all it's doing, but that's a big part of what it's doing, is that when we run this the first time, we're activating one of these events and we're turning the sprite on so it's visible. When we leave and come back, these events are back over here, but one of these sprites is going to be visible. It's going to be visible to the player. So this event runs really quickly, turns those self switches off so that the player can't see the sprite over here, and then this is going to run and it's going to swap the events again and turn that switch back on. Okay, turn the switch back on so the sprite reappears. But it does it so fast that you don't even see it happening because it happens so fast. Okay. All right. So now, what's the last piece? Well, we went through this. We went through this. We went through each of these, and then we went through what this is doing. The only thing I did up here was over here I made a quick thing to reset the map so that I could test it again. And I just had an image, same as character, action button. And when I click on it, it resets the event swap test variable to 0. It resets the NPC trackers to 0. And it resets the random event placement to 0. So it resets everything as if we had never been to that map before, so that it can all start over again, right? And then it tells me what it did. And then over here, this is where I was basically turning that switch on or off. If night is off, then I'm going to turn that switch on, and I'm going to tell you that it's on. Else, right? If night switch is on, then it's going to turn it off, and it's going to tell you it turned it off. That's the first thing it's doing, just turning a switch on and off. And then this is that playtest thing, right? The variable playtime test is equal to playtime. If playtime test is greater than 60, then this was something different. I'm sorry. This was within this event where I was showing that it was showing the minutes, right? First it was showing a value for seconds, and then it was minutes, right? So seconds versus minutes. There's other things you can do with that, but I was just messing around with this. In fact, I have another one where it's better than this, but it was just showing. I was messing around with showing the player how many seconds versus minutes had transpired in the game. Okay, that's all it was doing. And then if you notice here, I don't know if you noticed this. This really doesn't do anything. It's really just there for the picture, so that when you're in the game, this appears, but you can walk through it. So it makes it look like you're walking behind the tree. And then this is an interactable event. Okay? All right. So really quickly, just to kind of go over it again, this is running in parallel. And the first time on the map, it's going to decide where to place that sprite. Okay? And so it checks the variable. Is it less than 1, meaning it's 0? Then I'm going to figure out randomly where I'm going to place it. And then it goes through its events 4 times, right? You're taking 2 variables. You decide where on the map you want those to be. And then you use the set event location, this event, and then you use the variables to decide where it's going to appear. Okay? And you do that, 4 times. And like I said, all these pages weren't really much of anything. It does run in parallel, but once you swap the page, right, it's not in parallel anymore, right? You don't want a bunch of parallel events running unless they're doing something that's necessary. This one, basically, it waits 5 frames, so this can run, checks to see if night is on, right? Because if night's on, it's not going to show anything. It checks to see if it's 0, and if it is, it's going to jump down to the random where it determines what event it's going to swap to. But if it's not 0, so when we return to this map, right, when we leave and come back, it's going to say, wait a second, I already determined what event swap test was going to be. It's a 1, a 2, a 3, or 4. And then it's going to say, okay, depending on which value it is, jump to that label where it's going to swap the event, right? Then here is where, if it needs to, it's going to set up the event, right? It's going to randomly determine it. It's going to do the die roll, and then it's going to event swap test plus the die roll, and it's going to tell you where to jump to, and does each one of those. And then this is where all the magic's happening, right? If it's NPC 1, then it tells, okay, swap the middle with NPC 1. And then it turns that self switch on, right? Using the script, turns the self switch on here so the sprite appears, right? It moves to page 2 and the sprite appears and it's visible, right? And then turns its own self switch on here so it's no longer a parallel event, right? Running in parallel, but we advance the page and it's not in parallel anymore. And then exit the event processing. We want to get out of it, right? And again, same thing if it was jumping to NPC 2, you're swapping with the NPC 2 event. And just remember, this is the map, this is the event, and this is the switch you want to turn on or off. True is on, false is off. And then this one is blank, essentially, on page 1. Page 2 is when we turn that self switch on with a script. The sprite appears, and then you can do anything you want, right? I mean, you don't have to have multiple pages. It's just basically making the sprite visible and swapping it so that it is now here instead of over here. And there's 4 of those events. And then this event is, again, it's doing that mess around with the playtest. You don't have to have that. I was just messing around with how does it work. What it's really doing is it's taking this big block and it's saying, I need to turn off all of those self switches because I don't want, right, when you leave and come back, I don't want the player to see one of these sprites sitting over here, right? And I don't want the player to see a sprite sitting over here. I want the player to basically come back to the map and have this event turn those off so that they're invisible. It's running in parallel, so it erases itself, so it stops running. It's not going to keep running over and over again. It's going to erase itself. And then, since these are no longer, the sprites are no longer visible because the page 1 is the one that's active, right? And there's no image. Then this one, after waiting that very short period of time, runs through because it's also parallel, and then it says, oh, I need to swap what I had before, right? That's exactly what it's doing. So this is running in parallel, right, until you move the page. This is running in parallel until you change the page. And this is running in parallel until you erase the event. And these are just sitting here, not doing anything until they get triggered, right? They get triggered by turning on a self switch through a script, which makes their page change, which makes the sprite appear, and at the same time they're swapping with one of these is swapping with this event. Okay, that's it right there. That's how it's working. So now you obviously you might not have 2 of these on the same page, but here's the thing: you could have multiple of these on a big map, where you're randomly placing multiple events on a much larger map. Or let's say I use the example that you had a fixed location, and one time it's an NPC, one time it's an enemy, one time it's a portal, one time it's a treasure chest, whatever. What if you wanted to make, say, 10 NPCs that the player had to interact with at some point in time? But you didn't want them in fixed locations. So what you did is you said, you know what? I'm going to make these 10 NPCs. I'm going to put them all on the maps where they could appear. And then I'm going to have a location that is going to swap with one of them randomly. And what I'm going to do, so you'd have to build something different here, but what I'm going to do is the first time that one of those NPCs gets quote unquote set on a map, then it's no longer possible for them to be set on another map. And so if you were to do something like that and you had, say, 10 NPCs on 10 different maps, then each player would have a 1 in 10 chance of meeting an NPC on any given map. And so you'd have all kinds of variations there. And if somebody played through your game multiple times, they would get different experiences, right? So anyway, there's a ton of stuff you can do with this. But essentially, the functionality is take an event and then randomly place it somewhere, or purposefully place it somewhere. And then you have conditions that are set for where it gets placed. Or you have a fixed event and you're going to swap it with something else. Okay? I can think of all kinds of ways that you could do this, that you could implement this. And then this event down here is, turning off those self switches, because remember what I showed you at the very beginning. When you leave this map and come back, this event is back where it was, and these events are back where they were, and this event is back where it was. All right? So if you want it to be where it was, essentially, or roundabout where it was when the player left, you got to make it do that again. You got to make it run really fast and put it back where the player expects it to be. Okay? All right. Well, anyway, listen, I hope that's clear. I hope this is clear. This took me quite a bit to figure out. And like I said, I built it wrong, and then I had to troubleshoot it, and I had to fix it again. So I hope I explained this in a way that makes it clear to understand. I hope I did it in a way where if you like this, you can replicate this on your own, and then you can experiment with it, right? One of the things I do is, like, let's say that I wanted to play with this, but I wanted to make sure that I didn't lose what I had. I would just take this, I would copy this entire map, and then I would click here and I would paste it. And it's going to show up down here at the bottom. So now I have the map here and I have the map here, which means that I can now take this other map, rename it, and I can play with this to my heart's content. And if I completely screw it up because of what I've been doing, I can always go back and I can start over again. So I'm just going to get rid of this now. I'm going to delete that. But I do that all the time. Okay? If I have a map, if I have a bunch of stuff I want to play around with, I'll just duplicate the map. Or I'll take an event and I'll copy and paste it to something else, and then I'll experiment with it that way. Okay? All right. Anyway, I hope this helps, folks. Again, this is probably a long video too. I guess I get really long, but I hope this helps, folks. If these videos are helpful, or if at least you appreciate the length of time, the investment of time that it takes to do this, please consider liking, subscribing, getting notifications, leaving comments. I like comments. I do respond to all of them that I get. If you have questions, feel free to ask. I'll try to help. If you have suggestions, by all means, drop them. I'll try to help. If you anything like that, if you want to share with things, share information with me, I'm happy to get it. So anyway, I'm not sure. I doubt I'll be able to get much more up, folks. This is going to be a really busy week, but I'll see if I can do something. Anyway, in the meantime, again, I hope this helps you out. I hope this helps you out on your journey. Until I can get something else up, have a great afternoon. Happy gaming, happy game developing, and I will talk to everybody later. Bye.